Welcome to the Quick Start video series for Cubase 6. My name's Donna Hansen. In these tutorials, I'll show you how to set up Cubase 6, and then we'll explore its new features and considerable capabilities. Whether you're a first-time user or an experienced producer, you'll find helpful tips and techniques to improve the quality of your productions. These videos are intended to serve two purposes. First, they'll illustrate basic operations to help the new user operate Cubase quickly and avoid common mistakes. Second, these videos will illustrate the new features in Cubase 6 and demonstrate some techniques to help the advanced user get the most out of Cubase in the least amount of time. Over the next 2 hours, we'll be covering the following subjects. In Part 1, we'll demonstrate getting started, getting connected, basic audio recording, basic MIDI recording, and basic mixing. In Part 2, we'll demonstrate advanced audio recording and processing, advanced MIDI applications, Steinberg's new note expression technology, advanced workflow techniques, basic scoring techniques and generate tablature, and the use of remote control devices, quick controls, and outboard equipment. Let's start with the basic requirements you'll need for these video tutorials. Please also refer to the minimum system requirements of Cubase 6, which you can find printed on the Cubase 6 box. At a minimum, you'll need a PC running Windows 7, or a Mac running OS X 10.6 Snow Leopard, a USB e-licenser. You'll also need a My Steinberg account, which you will create during the registration process, an audio interface and a microphone, a MIDI interface and a MIDI input device, speakers, an amplifier, and headphones. Configuring the software is a very simple 3-step process: installation, activation, and registration. Place the installation CD into your computer and follow the on-screen prompts to activate your license and register the software immediately. Once Cubase is installed, double-click its icon to launch the program. Once Cubase opens, the main screen you'll see is the Project Assistant. The 6 tabs along the top provide quick access to a wide variety of project templates for different activities. The recording and production templates are preloaded with tracks, instruments, and even drum parts to get you going quickly. When you record, Cubase streams the audio directly to your hard drive. This means you'll have to tell Cubase where the project file will be saved before you can begin to record. A Cubase project is actually made up of several parts. The 2 most important parts are the project file and the audio folder. The project file contains all of the settings. The audio folder contains the actual audio files. The menus at the bottom of the Project Assistant let you choose where Cubase will store your project. You should start a new project folder for each song to help keep things neat and organized. Select Prompt for Project Location if you want to manually create your project folder, or select Use Default Location if you want Cubase to create the project folder. Let's start off with an empty project. We'll use Prompt for Location and click Continue. Now let's navigate to the desktop and create a new folder called My First Project. Click Create, then click Open. The main work area shown here is called the Project window. Let's create a few tracks to get oriented to the Cubase environment. Open the Project menu and hover over Add Track. The drop-down menu displays all of the types of tracks you can create. Let's select Audio Track. Let's create 3 audio tracks at once by increasing the count from 1 to 3. We're going to make each of these mono tracks by changing the configuration from stereo to mono. Then click Add Track. OK, now let's take a look around and focus on a handful of key terms and important icons. Along the very top of the screen are 12 menus. These are always visible when using Cubase. You open them with a single click. Let's reopen the Project menu. You can also access the menu items with key commands shown to the right. For example, the Project Setup function can also be opened by pressing Shift and S. If you see 3 dots after the menu item, it means another menu will open with more choices, like this. If you don't see any dots, then the action will be carried out as soon as you click on the menu, for example, the Notepad function. If you see a black triangle, like the one next to Add Track, a submenu will appear when you hover over that item. Menu items shown in gray are not available at the current time. Let's look at one more very important menu item, the Help menu. The Help menu has submenus for all of your manuals. It has shortcuts to numerous online resources including updates, support, and a forum, and it has a search function. Let's search on the keyword MIDI. Cubase now shows us 2 types of results, menu items and help topics. When you hover over a menu item, Cubase will guide you directly to that function's location. When you click on a help topic, Cubase opens a text screen with more information. Moving on to the project window, the top center area of the window frame shows the default author and the project name. Since we haven't saved this project yet, the project name defaults to Untitled 1. The next row of icons is called the toolbar. The toolbar contains icons for commonly used functions. You can right-click anywhere on the toolbar to see a list of active sections. You can also open the Setup window to further configure the toolbar. For example, let's hide Automation Mode by selecting it and moving it to the Hidden Items list. We can also rearrange the information. Let's move the time display to the right end of the toolbar by selecting it in the Visible Items list and moving it down. Cubase has set up menus for many other functions that you can configure, just like this one. One quick note. You can hover over just about any icon and Cubase will display a tooltip that tells you what the icon is, like this. This icon is the Window Layout button. This is a very important control, and you'll see it throughout Cubase. When you click the Window Layout button, the active window dims and a selection box appears. Here you can choose which panels you wish to display in a given window. In this example, you can see that the Info line and Inspector are visible, but the Status line and Overview line are hidden. Here's how it works. Anytime you see the Window Layout button, remember that there may be additional panels that are not being displayed. At the top of the project window is the project timeline. If you right-click on the timeline, you can select what units it will display. If you left-click on the timeline, you'll move the project cursor to that location. And if you click and drag, you can zoom in and out. There are other ways to control zoom. We'll look at those in a moment. 2 of the most important tools in Cubase are these white triangles called locators. Locators define the starting and ending points for your project. Click and drag to adjust the locators. If the locators are placed correctly, the area between them will be light blue. If you transpose them, the area between the locators turn red to alert you to the problem. At the left edge of the project window is the Track Inspector. The inspector provides quick access to the controls and settings for that track. The functions are organized under 11 collapsible tabs. To open a tab, click it. To close the tab, click it again. Some track functions are duplicated in multiple locations. The first tab is open by default. Here you'll find the track name, a duplicate set of track controls, as well as controls for track volume, stereo panning, track delay, used in synchronization, and controls for setting the track's input and output source. We'll look closely at these features in later chapters. This icon is the Edit Channel Settings button. It's a very important control, and you'll see it throughout Cubase. Whenever you see this icon, you can click on it to open the editing function for that area. Finally, we have a few more basic navigation tools. You have standard scroll bars for horizontal and vertical viewing. You can click and drag the right-hand corner to resize the project window. You also have a set of zoom controls. Click and drag the triangles to configure the horizontal zoom and track height. You also have preset zoom levels available from these pop-up menus. That's it for our first chapter. Now let's move on to Chapter 2 and get Cubase connected inside and out. In this chapter, we're going to explore how to set up and configure the internal and external connections required for both audio and MIDI. Let's begin with the map of the system, and then I'll show you how to connect them together. The major external system components are a computer with a valid USB-E licenser, the audio interface. For this video, we'll be using the Steinberg MR816X. Monitor speakers and headphones, input devices like microphones and instruments, a MIDI interface, a MIDI input device like a keyboard, cables, and power. Follow the manufacturer's instructions to connect the amps, speaker, headphones, and instruments. Connect the interface to the computer by USB or FireWire as appropriate. Turn on the interface, and then the computer. Make sure you have the latest drivers for your interface. Even if your interface came with a CD of drivers, you should check the website for any updates and download them if needed. Now we're ready to launch Cubase and begin setting up the internal connections. To do this, open the Device menu and select Device Setup. This dialog box is where you control all of the connections between Cubase and external hardware. On the left side of the screen, you can select what device you want to configure, such as MIDI, remotes, video, etc. For this video, we're going to configure devices for MIDI and audio. The right side of the screen is where you adjust the settings. Let's set up our MIDI interface by selecting All MIDI Inputs. Next, we'll designate which MIDI ports we want Cubase to use. MIDI output is used if you're controlling external instruments and devices. We'll leave that alone for now. You can also choose which ports to show or hide. By hiding items you don't use, the MIDI input menu in the inspector is streamlined. Next, we're going to move to the VST audio device. Before we go any further, let's explain three terms: ASIO, VST, and latency. ASIO stands for Audio Stream Input Output. ASIO is a digital audio protocol designed by Steinberg that allows for extremely high speed and high fidelity by connecting an application like Cubase directly to the sound card. This direct high-speed communication with the sound card makes it possible to process multiple, high-quality channels at one time. VST stands for Virtual Studio Technology and is another Steinberg innovation. VST allows for the seamless integration of software, plugins, and hardware. It also allows for connections that mimic a traditional recording studio. VST connections are what link all parts of the Cubase environment together. Latency is the short period of time, usually milliseconds, that it takes for an audio signal to be processed by a digital system. Latency results from analog to digital conversion, buffering, and signal processing. The more processing you apply to a signal, the more latency you will introduce. Latency is a primary factor when recording live audio. If the latency value is too large, the performer will hear a delay similar to an echo between the time they play a note and when they hear it in their monitors. Let's return to the VST audio device setup page and look at ways to control latency as we finish configuring our device. You select the ASO driver of your audio interface here. I'll pick the Yamaha Firewire device, which is the MR816. Below it, Cubase tells you how much latency the driver will introduce while processing the incoming signal. Anything above about 5 milliseconds will become noticeable. We can reduce latency by reducing the interface's buffer or working memory. However, if you set the buffer size too low, you risk introducing pops and clicks. The specifications of your computer will determine how low you can get without problems. On the other hand, when you're mixing, we recommend you set the buffer size to a larger value to get the best performance out of your computer. The better way to eliminate latency is by using direct monitoring, if your interface supports it. Direct monitoring sends the live signal back to the musician directly from the interface before processing, so no latency is introduced at all. We now have the MIDI and audio devices configured. Let's look at how to set up the various connections within Cubase so we can begin to record. Open the device menu and find VST Connections. VST Connections is the control center for all of your routing. Use the tabs at the top to select which family of connections you want to work with. Let's start with Inputs. You'll see the word bus used a lot in Cubase. Using buses may sound confusing, but they're really straightforward. Just like a real bus picks up people at a station and can drop them at any of several locations along a route, an audio bus takes a signal from one source and makes it available to any destination. So when we set up an input bus, we're creating a route within Cubase for the incoming signal. That signal can then use any destination along its route. This means an incoming signal can be routed to one track, several tracks, a combination of tracks and devices, and so forth. By using buses, Cubase can use a small number of inputs to connect to a virtually unlimited number of tracks. Let's create 2 input buses so we can record a guitar and a voice at the same time on separate channels. Click Add Bus. Select what configuration you want to use and how many. Let's keep things simple and just add 2 mono buses for now. Now we can name the buses. These names will be displayed in the track inspector and on the mixer to help you identify signal routing. And we can choose which physical input you want to use on the interface. You can save this configuration as a preset. This will help re-establish your connections quickly if your interface goes offline. You can also define a default input to be used anytime you create a new audio track. Now, let's configure the output bus. We'll look at how to connect external FX and instruments and the Studio tab in later chapters. We should be fully connected. Let's move on to Chapter 3 and start recording. In this chapter, we'll cover the basics of audio recording. Along the way, we'll apply what we've learned in Chapters 1 and 2. For this demonstration, we'll use an original song called Gonna Get You by Blissful Whisper. Right now, the song is just a guitar part and a vocal part. Open the File menu and select New Project. Let's use the Project Assistant to select a template that will help us get going quickly. Click on the Recording tab. Here, you'll find several pre-configured templates. The small text under the title suggests how to use them. Let's use the template for acoustic guitar and vocal. We'll also select Prompt for Project Location at the bottom of the Project Assistant and click Continue. To keep things simple, let's create a new project folder on the desktop. I'm going to give the project folder the same name as the song, Gonna Get You, and then click Open. Here's our project window. Let's enlarge it using the handle in the lower right corner. You can see that the template contains 2 audio tracks that have already been named for our intended parts. If you look closely at the first track, you'll notice that the icons for Insert Effects State and EQ State are illuminated. This tells us that there are insert effects and EQ settings already active on this channel. The blue Send Effects State icon on track 2 tells us that send effects are in use as well. You might notice a third track named FX Channels. This is a folder track. If we click the folder icon, it opens to show us that a basic reverb effect has been added to this project. We'll discuss effects in more detail in Chapter 5. The next thing we need to do is connect track 1 to the appropriate input on our audio interface. The easiest way to do this is with the first tab in the inspector. This icon displays the input routing. Since the microphone for the guitar happens to be connected to input number 2, let's connect track 1 to input 2, like this. Since the microphone for the vocals is connected to input number 1, let's connect track 2 to input 1, like this. The output will automatically connect to our only output bus, which is labeled here as Stereo Out. In order to hear the input signal, we have to turn on the input monitor for each track by clicking the small speaker icon. In order to record the input signal, we have to arm each track. To do that, click on the Record Enable button. The button will turn red when enabled. Okay, the tracks are now armed. We need one more device to help us set the recording levels. Let's call up our project mixer. Open the Devices menu and select Mixer. I'm going to take just a moment and resize the project window, move the transport panel, and adjust the size and layout of the project mixer so we can see everything we need on one screen. We'll go over the mixer in more detail in Chapter 5, but here are the basics. The mixer has input channels on the left, mixer channels in the center, and output channels on the right. Since the input monitor is active, we can see the input signal level here and the recorded level here. The default position for the faders is 0. Any signal recorded above 0 will cause clipping. You'll see this red light appear if clipping occurs. Clipping must be avoided during recording and cannot be fixed later. For now, let's try to get our recording levels between -3 and -6. Our performer is already wearing headphones which are connected directly to the MR816 audio interface. Let's give our performer a metronome to help her keep timing consistent. The metronome is also known as a click track, and it can be turned on and off by pressing the C key on your computer's keyboard. You can adjust the sound and volume of the metronome using the metronome setup dialog. Here we go with take 1. Press the record button on the transport panel.
Could I have just a little bit more of me in my headphones, please? Brilliant. Sunrise on my first day without you. Now I can see the hole in my heart. Night falls, but my hopes are rising. I'll repair what's torn us apart. Up, down, here and there, my love's gonna get you. Don't hide, my friend. After the storm, there's our double rainbow. Can't wait to see you again.
Nice job! The guitar performance was terrific. The vocal performance was good too, but there was one glitch, a cough, in the middle. To listen to the performance, we'll need to disable the input monitor by deselecting the yellow speaker icon.
Just a little bit more of me
then return to the beginning and
Brilliant.
Press play.
Sunrise on my first day without.
We could try to mix out the cough since it happens between words, but because the voice and guitar were recorded at the same time, some of the coughing spilled into the guitar mic. Let's try this again, but record the guitar in one pass and then overdub the vocal in a second pass. This will give us complete isolation on each part and complete control after recording. Nice job! Now, let's record the vocal.
I don't hear anything. Sunrise on my first day without you. Now I can see the hole in my heart.
Terrific take. There was a laugh between phrases, but that's no problem. We recorded the vocal in isolation, and it can be easily edited out. We can use the waveform zoom to help get a better look at what's in each track. Let's edit out the talking before the take and the laughter. Zoom and scroll until you can see the part you want to edit. Let's turn off the snap function to allow more flexibility in where we place our edits. I'll position the scissors each place I want to cut and then click. Now I can use the eraser tool to remove the unwanted portions. These are simple editing techniques compared to Cubase's rich set of editing functions, but they solve our immediate problem. Let's listen. Much better. We have a good start. Let's move on to Chapter 4 and see how to use MIDI and some VST instruments to add more parts to our first tracks. In this chapter, we're going to cover the basics of MIDI recording. We'll continue our work on the original song called Gonna Get You. So far, we've recorded a guitar part and a vocal part. Now, it's time to add drums and a piano part using MIDI and VST instruments. Let's begin with a basic review of MIDI and how it works. MIDI stands for Music Instrument Digital Interface. It's a computer language that allows musical instruments to talk to one another. MIDI was developed in the early 80s and is still in use 20 years later. That's remarkable longevity in the world of computers and a testimony to how well MIDI works. Recording MIDI is fundamentally different from recording audio. For one thing, no sound is recorded, only instructions. The most basic MIDI commands are note on and note off. A MIDI file has a lot in common with an old player piano scroll. So much so that even today most MIDI editors refer to their user interface as a piano roll. When you press the key of a piano, actual sound is generated. By comparison, when you press the key of a MIDI keyboard, all that comes out is a note on command. When you release the keyboard transmits a note off command. This means you need two components to make music with MIDI. You need a controller, or input device, to generate the commands, and you need a sound module, or tone generator, to generate the actual sounds. Cubase comes with a powerful arsenal of these sound modules called VST instruments. You can use any MIDI controller to trigger them. For this video, we'll use a traditional keyboard as our MIDI controller. Let's look at an example. Let's begin by selecting some VST instruments. Open the Devices menu and select VST Instruments. The window that opens simulates an empty equipment rack. Click in the black window to display all available VST instruments. Let's select our dedicated drum synthesizer, Groove Agent 1, as our first instrument. Cubase will ask us if we want to create an associated MIDI track. Normally, it would be easiest to click Create, but let's click Cancel so we can walk through the process manually to understand it better. The user interface for Groove Agent 1 opens automatically. We could spend 2 hours just on this remarkable instrument, but to keep things moving along, let's simply load it up with sounds and keep going. To do this, click in the preset window. I'm going to select the voices called Vinyl Kit, but you can see that hundreds are available. Close Groove Agent 1. Now we have a sound module loaded up with drum sounds. Next, we need a track of MIDI data to trigger those sounds. Open the Project menu and select Add Track, then MIDI Track. Leave the count at 1 and click Add Track. A new MIDI track is added to the main project window. You'll notice that the MIDI track and the audio tracks have some subtle differences. They have different track icons, and they have slightly different track controls, but they're more similar than different. Let's route this MIDI track to Groove Agent 1. Now, click on the tab for MIDI inserts and select Beat Designer. This is the primary rhythm composer in Cubase. We'll look at how to use Beat Designer in detail later. For now, let's get it loaded. Click on the Preset Management icon and select Load Preset. Let's select Vinyl Groove 130 since these patterns line up well with the Vinyl Kit sounds loaded in Groove Agent 1. At the bottom of Beat Designer, you'll see 4 pattern banks. If there's a dot, then that pattern bank has content already loaded. Below the pattern banks are sub-banks laid out like a keyboard. Again, if there's a dot, then that sub-bank is loaded with patterns. To preview a pattern, Click the corresponding key and then press play on the transport panel. When you find a pattern or a subbank that you like, click this triangle and insert it into your project. Repeat this process until you've created a rhythm track you're happy with. Once your MIDI track is loaded with patterns, you can turn off Beat Designer so it doesn't confuse matters by continuing to play in the background. Here's how our drum part sounds so far.
I'll repair what's torn us apart. Up, down, here and there. My love's gonna get you. Don't hide my friend. After the storm, there's our double rainbow. Can't wait to see you again.
Okay, let's add a piano part. We'll also do this using MIDI and VST instruments, but we're going to try another technique. Steinberg has created a feature called an instrument track, which is a MIDI track and a VST instrument bundled together. To create an instrument track, open the Project menu and select Add Track and Instrument Track. When the dialog box opens, set the count to 1 so we only create a single instrument track. Use the drop-down menu under Instrument to select the VST instrument for this track. Let's pick the Halon Sonic SE device and click Add Track. Here again you'll see a new track with the new track icon and slightly different track controls. Use the Edit Instrument icon and select a preset. Let's use the grand piano. Select the instrument track, double-click on the name area, and rename it Piano. Do the same for track 3 and name it Drums. Okay, let's lay down the piano part. Select the piano track, arm the Record Enable button, and activate the input monitor. I'll have the keyboard player play a few notes on the MIDI keyboard just to make sure he can hear the tones in his headset and that all the connections are correct. Here we go.
I'll repair what's torn us apart. Up, down, here and there. My love's gonna get you. Don't hide my friend. After the storm, there's our double rainbow. Can't wait to see you again.
There are a few drop notes, but that's okay. MIDI's easy to edit. Double-click on the MIDI performance in the project window to open the editor, also known as the key editor. You'll see a matrix with MIDI notes. The pitches are shown by notes in a vertical position. Its duration is represented by how long the line is. Its velocity, or volume, is shown both by its color and the graph at the bottom of the window. There's a piano keyboard shown vertically along the leftmost margin. You can use the Key Editor toolbar to edit the performance. Move notes, delete notes, add notes, and edit notes. This is only a small example of Cubase's power, but it will do for now. Okay, let's move on to Chapter 5 and take a look at EQ, effects, and the basic mixdown procedure. In this chapter, we're going to take the next step and learn how to use the basic mixing functions in Cubase. We'll take a quick look at how to set levels, adjust panning, use equalization, apply effects, and select an appropriate mixdown format. Let's take a moment and look at the production cycle to see how the mixdown phase fits in. There are no hard and fast rules, but here's how the process usually flows. The first step is tracking. Tracking is the process of recording individual parts, like the instrument track we set up in Chapter 4. The second step is normally overdubbing. That's the process of adding additional tracks to your basic recording. The next is often editing. This can be cleaning up unwanted noises, fixing MIDI notes and multiple takes into a single performance, called compositing or comping. We'll cover compositing in more detail in Chapter 6. Then we'll move to mixdown. During mixdown, all the tracks, effects, and edits are combined into a single file. For music production, this file is usually a stereo file. We typically mix one song at a time. Finally, after all the songs for a collection are mixed, they need to be mastered for duplication and distribution. We'll look briefly at mastering in Chapter 10. In an analog studio, the engineer mixed a song by playing a multi-track recorder through a physical mixing desk and recording them on a 2-track tape machine, all in real time. In Cubase, the actual mixdown process consists of exporting a multi-track file through a virtual mixing desk onto a 2-track file. Since we've finished editing, we can resize the track height in the project window to give us more room to work. Let's call up the project mixer. Click this icon to open the extended view of the mixer. We can select a variety of items to display in the extended view. Use the icons on the left side of the window to set all the channels to the same type of display. Let's switch to meters. Now, begin playback and adjust the levels of each track until you get a satisfactory rough mix.
My love's gonna get you. Don't hide, my friend. After the storm, there's our double rainbow. Can't wait to see you again.
You'll probably have to make small changes as we adjust equalization and effects. There are very few hard and fast rules about mixing and lots of options. Be sure to read the user's manual, visit the Steinberg knowledge base, and visit the Cubase community forums for detailed advice about mixing techniques. You can create group tracks to control large numbers of elements at once. We'll use this feature more in later chapters. You can also hold down the Command key, select several tracks, and link them. Now their faders move together. I'm going to start by setting the drums so the loudest parts are just under the peak level. Now I'll bring in the piano and guitar. I'll pan the piano off to the left and the guitar off to the right to create a wider stereo image and make more room for the voice in the middle. Next, I'll use equalization, or simply EQ, to help the tracks fit together better. EQ is simply a filter that can be adjusted to boost some frequencies and cut others. You can think of it as an elaborate tone control. You can use EQ correctively to fix problems, or artistically to create effects. Let's use EQ to fix one problem. If I solo the acoustic guitar, we see that the sound has too much bass in it. Most likely I put the microphone too close to the sound hole during recording. We can use EQ to fix this. Start by clicking the E button on this track to open its editor. The editor has insert effects along the left side EQ in the center, send effects to the right, and a set of track controls to the far right. We'll look at effects in just a moment. The EQ can adjust up to 4 frequency ranges at once. Begin by turning on each of the EQ sections. Each band has 3 controls: gain, frequency, and Q. Use the gain control to boost or cut the volume of a specific frequency. Use the frequency control to select what tonal range you want to adjust. Use the Q control to shape how tightly or how broadly these adjustments are applied. There are 2 rules of thumb for using EQ. First, if possible, try to get the sound you want by cutting rather than boosting. This will leave you with a cleaner mix when you're finished. Second, try to avoid using more than 6 decibels of gain unless you're trying for an extreme effect. If you have to use a lot of EQ to fix the tone, you can probably get a better sound by using a different microphone or a different microphone placement. I've learned that many acoustic guitars have extra bass sound centered around 150 to 200 Hz. So I'm going to start in that area to fix the problem. Here's another trick. If you're trying to eliminate a problem frequency, you may be able to locate it faster by using an extreme boost and then fishing with the frequency control, like this. There's the problem. That's the frequency range which is too loud. Now that I've identified it, I'll use a subtle cut to ease it out of our track. Let's listen to it with the rest of the mix. If you want to do a quick A to B comparison of your EQ adjustment, use this bypass button to cycle the EQ in and out. We're almost ready for our first mixdown, but let's return to the subject of effects. There are literally thousands of effect plugins that you can use with Cubase. The more common types include reverberation, delay or echo, dynamic or volume control, and modulation effects like chorus and flanger. You can add effects to a track in 2 basic ways. You can insert the effect across the entire signal path and run 100% of the track through the effect. Or you can set up a separate effect track and then send only some of the track through it for a more blended or subtle effect. Each method is useful in different situations. For example, if I want to use a compressor to help control the volume of a track, I need the compressor to control that entire track. So I'll run the entire track through the compressor by using the insert method. However, if I want to use an effect in a more subtle fashion, which is common with reverb, I'll set it up as a send effect. This allows the process signal and the original to blend. Let's insert a compressor across the drum track to help tame some of the louder portions. Open the drum track editor. Create an insert effect. Compressors will be found on the Dynamics menu. Turn on the effect. And let's select an appropriate preset and close the editor. We'll apply just a little reverb to all of the tracks to help create the illusion that they're all recorded in the same acoustic space. This will help tie our mix together. Be careful with reverb, it's easy to overdo it. Okay, we've adjusted the levels, EQ, pan, and effects. Let's generate our first mixdown. Open the File menu and select Export Audio. The export dialog allows us to choose the quality and the location of our mixed file. A stereo wave file will be the highest resolution, but it'll also be very large. Since this is just a rough mix and we may want to send it by email to other musicians, let's mix it down in the MP3 format. That will be good enough quality for now and a small enough file size to move around easily. Select Format here. Fill in the ID tag information. Make sure the file path is correct. Let's use the desktop. You can have Cubase automatically add the mix file back into the project. Let's save this option for our final mixdown later. Finally, click Export. Here's our first mixed stereo file. Let's move on to Chapter 6, where we'll see how to take our demo to the next level using some of the advanced features in Cubase. In this chapter, we'll return to audio recording and look at some of the more advanced features in Cubase. We'll explore the project folder contents, using track presets to overdub an electric and a bass guitar, the new VST amp rack, how to punch in and punch out, vocal comping using the new lanes feature, and vocal editing using VariAudio. Let's take a moment and look at what's changed inside the project folder. You can see that Cubase has automatically created a lot of files here. The audio folder has a copy of every take. The images folder has peak files, which are waveform images for every take. There are backup files from every autosave, and there's also an edits folder to save audio files which we've modified. Finally, there's the main Cubase project file, which has a .cpr extension. All of these files and folders are necessary for your project to work. We'll look at how to handle them in a later chapter. Okay, it's time to add our electric guitar part. Open the project menu, select Add Track, and then choose Audio. Let's take a closer look at our options in the Add Audio Track window. The selections for Count, Configuration, and Speakers all look good. Let's click on the Browse button here to the left and use the Window Layout tool to display the filters and previewer panes. The Add Audio Track window has now become a small version of Media Bay to help us search for track presets. Track presets are tracks which have been pre-configured for various types of material. You can see that Steinberg provides a lot of presets to get you going. Fortunately, they also provide you with some powerful filtering tools to help find what you want quickly. The Filters pane on the left is easy to use. The Filters pane is where you set up search criteria. The Results pane on the right displays everything that matches those criteria. First, select which type of filter you want, attribute or logical. Let's start with attribute. The Filters pane now presents 5 columns of attributes such as category and style. Begin on the left and select a category of instrument. For our example, we want guitar, plucked. Notice that some categories are grayed out. This means that there are no results that match that category. For example, there are no track presets for accordion. Click on Guitar, Plucked, and notice that the Results pane changes from 500 results. Let's move to the Style column and select Jazz. You can also adjust the column headings like this. You can also filter using the logical mode. Let's search for Name, Matches, Single Coil, and watch how the pane's result reacts. You can use this button to reset filters if you want to start over. Let's pick Jazz Guitar Single Coil and click Add Track. You can see that Cubase has created a new audio track below the previously selected track and gave it the same name as the track preset we selected. To see how this track is configured, open Edit Channel Settings by clicking on the E button in that track. You can see that there are 3 insert effects added to help us get close to a single coil jazz guitar sound. They are the Vintage Compressor, Amp Simulator, and Studio EQ. To see their individual settings again, click on the E. Of course, a track preset is only a starting point. You can adjust all of the track settings to suit your music. Let's rename our track as simply Lead Guitar, and we'll try a take. For this pass, we'll have our musician Dave plug directly into the MR816X audio interface. No amp and no microphone. This will help demonstrate how much tone and character Cubase can deliver. Since the lead guitar only plays during the middle of the song, we'll start this take at about 8 bars before the solo. This should give Dave enough time to get into the groove. Since we're not using a microphone, he can simply use the control room monitors and play along with the song.
Can't wait to see you again. Up, down, here and there.
Nice job, Dave. Love those double bends. To make it easy to come back to the same spot, let's take a moment to create a marker track. A marker track is used for navigating around your project. Select the Project menu, then Add Track, and then select Marker. I simply click and hold on the marker track, then drag it. The green line shows where the track will be dropped. Now, I'll create markers for the start, end, and solo sections of the song. Position the cursor at the start of the song and click the Add Marker icon. Do the same for the end of the song. Notice that the marker number automatically increases. Now I'll position the cursor a few bars ahead of the guitar solo and click Add Marker. Marker 1 should always go at the start of the song and marker 2 at the end. To help keep things straight, I'm going to rename marker 3 and give it a unique color. To do this, click on the E in the marker track or press Command or Control M. This will open the marker window. Here I can type in new positions, set section lengths if we're using cycle markers, and enter a description. Cycle markers are covered in the operation manual. Let's call this Guitar Solo. Finally, back in the project window, we'll select marker number 3, then open the color palette and click on yellow. The selected marker will always be red, but you can see when another marker is selected. Marker number 3 is now bright yellow. Let's try a few more track presets to see how quickly you can change the tone and character of Dave's performance. Wow. Interesting, but probably too much for this song. Okay, sounds like we were right the first time. Let's use the new amp rack to make a few adjustments. First, open the editor for the lead guitar track. Now, let's replace the Amp Simulator plugin with the new VST Amp Rack plugin. This very cool new plugin gives you all the tools a guitarist would want. First, make sure to open the extended display by clicking on the light gray icon in the top of the cabinet. There are 6 tabs at the top of the cabinet that let you select pre-effects like chorus, amplifiers, cabinets, post-effects, microphone position, and a master section. Microphone position gives you a choice between a condenser mic or a dynamic mic, distance from the cabinet, and whether or not the microphone is on axis or off axis. Of course, you still have the standard tone controls on the face of the unit. You can click these icons at the side to see your pre- and post-effects. And you can click this lock icon to link or unlink the amplifier and the cabinet selections. When all your settings are dialed in, you have the option to switch back to Hide Extended Display to save display space. Use the cube icon to save your settings as a preset. Now let's store all of this as our own track preset. Right-click or Command-click on the track and select Save Track Preset. Let's name this one Dave's Guitar. Now we can quickly recall these settings on future projects. Our song's coming along, but we really need a bass guitar to lock down the rhythm section. First, we'll create a new audio track for the bass using a track preset. Now, we'll have Carter plug his bass directly into the audio interface. Okay, let's give it a try.
What's torn us apart, up, down, here and there. My love's gonna get you. Don't hide my friend. After the storm.
Pretty good, but there's one rough spot in the middle. Let's use punch in and punch out to clean it up. Position the left locator at the spot where you want to punch in. Position the right locator where you want the overdubbing to stop. That's known as punching out. You engage the punch in feature by pressing the I key or clicking here on the transport panel. Engage the punch out feature by pressing the O key on the keyboard or clicking here on the transport panel. Make sure the Record Enable function is armed for the target track. Place the cursor ahead of the punch-in point. Now when we press play, Carter will play along and Cubase will automatically punch him in and out at our locator positions, like this.
My love's gonna get you. Don't hide my friend. After the storm there.
Terrific. Nice job, Carter. Let's turn our attention back to vocals. We'll have Andrew lay down a few different harmony parts. We'll use cycle recording and the new lanes feature to capture several takes in a row. Then we'll build a composite performance, known as comping, to get our final track. Create a new audio track. Click on the Show Lanes icon. Position the locators to either side of the target section, leaving enough room to get ready for each take. Enable Transport Cycle by clicking here. Record enabled the track. When we click Record, Cubase will capture the audio and then continue to cycle between the locators, laying down a new pass in its own lane, like this.
Apart,
Up, down, here and there.
my love's gonna get
It's our double rainbow. Up, down, here and there.
My love's gonna get.
Up, down, here and there.
My love's gonna get.
Now we have each pass recorded into a separate lane. We can use the Cut tool to cut all lanes at once into the same spot. Then, simply click on these portions you want to hear. The muted sections are shown in light gray. Watch how only the selected portions of each lane plays back.
Us apart,
Up, down, here and there.
my love's gonna get you.
Don't hide, my friend.
Once our composite performance is defined, we can use bounce selection to create one seamless waveform. The last thing we're going to cover in this tutorial is using Vari Audio to edit and correct the vocal performance. Start by double-clicking the part you want to work on. This opens the sample editor. The sample editor is where you make all kinds of changes to your audio waveform. For now, we'll just look at how to make pitch corrections using VariAudio. There are 6 tabs in the inspector on the left edge of the screen. Click on VariAudio. Select Pitch and Warp by clicking the arrowhead. Cubase will analyze the waveform and break it into segments based on musical pitch. Inside each box or segment is a line representing the pitch. You can click and drag a segment to change its pitch. And you can use quantize pitch and straighten pitch to further adjust the accuracy of the performance. Subtle changes can be impossible to detect, while radical pitch shifts may result in audible artifacts. Let's make a few minor edits. Terrific! Let's move on to Chapter 7, where we'll see how to use VariAudio to create a harmony part. Then we'll look at how to work with multi-track drums, introduce Media Bay, and explore how to integrate loops. In this chapter, we'll continue working with audio recording and look at some of the more advanced features in Cubase. In this chapter, we're going to use VariAudio to create a harmony vocal part, an introduction to multi-track drums, use Media Bay and Mini Media Bay to find additional material, and work with loops. We can use VariAudio for more than just making corrections. We can use it to create additional harmony parts too. Let's use Andrew's harmony track as an example. First, we'll duplicate the entire track. Now, I'll cut the track and delete sections we won't need. Now let's open the sample editor for this portion. You can see the part has already been analyzed because of the segment shown in the sample editor window. Now let's experiment by dragging a few of these segments up and down to create an even thicker harmony part.
Up, down, here and there. Here and there. Don't hide, my friend. Don't hide, my friend.
You can use this same technique to create additional melodies or harmonies for any monophonic signal such as a flute, violin, bass, or of course voice. Let's take a closer look at the drums and see how multi-track drums open up more options. First, we'll convert our MIDI drum track to multiple channels. Then we'll replace our MIDI drums entirely and use a live drummer. Let's double-click on the drum part and open the MIDI key editor. Here you can see that each drum sound is represented by a different key on our VST instrument. This is convenient when you're creating a drum part because you can work with all of the drums on one screen. But now that we have our drum patterns completed, let's move each drum sound into its own track. Open the MIDI menu, then select Dissolve Part. You have the option of separating your MIDI data by channel or by pitch. Since we have a different drum sound on each key or pitch, we'll select Separate Pitches. For this application, we don't want to use lanes because we want each drum sound in its own track for processing. Click OK. Cubase has now placed each note value on its own track. This means we have more tracks to deal with, but we have more flexibility too. For instance, we can now mix the level of each drum sound individually, like this. Or we can apply EQ to individual drums without changing the overall sound of the kit, like this. We can even route individual drums through their own effects, like this. By dissolving the part into 10 separate instrument tracks, we've caused Cubase to create 10 separate instances of Groove Agent 1. That certainly gives us a lot of flexibility, but it also uses more CPU power. Later, we'll look at how to use a VST instrument rack to reduce CPU load in this situation. In our final chapters, we'll take this concept one step further and actually swap out the MIDI drums for an audio recording of a live drummer. Now, let's change musical styles and look at how to produce loop-based electronic music. Let's start a new project. Much of today's music, dance music in particular, is created with loops. Audio loops are pre-recorded segments of audio that can be placed in sequence to form a track. We'll also show you how to make these pre-recorded loops match the tempo of your project. The first thing that we need to do is locate all of our available loops. That's a big job, but fortunately we have a powerful tool to help us, Media Bay. Media Bay is the control center for all of your sounds, presets, loops, and patches in Cubase. You open Media Bay under the Media drop-down menu or by pressing F5. Use the Window Layout tool to open all of Media Bay's panes. This is a lot of information, but Media Bay is very easy to use. The Define Locations pane is used to configure Media Bay and tell it where to find the media files on your hard drive. If we expand the VST sound file, you can see most of the Steinberg factory content is here. The color of the check marks and the folder icons tell you what files have been scanned and which have not. The color coding is explained in the operations manual. Let's close the Define Locations pane for now. On the other side of Media Bay, you'll see the Attribute Inspector pane. The Attribute Inspector allows you to categorize your media, also known as tagging, to make it easier to find and to filter. The Attribute Inspector is a powerful organization tool. It's also explained in detail in the operations manual. Let's close the Attribute Inspector pane for now. The remaining 4 panes are used to locate and select media. The Locations pane tells Media Bay where to look. We'll set this to VST Sound. The Filters pane lets you search for media by attribute or by typing in logical criteria. This is the same system we used to find track presets in an earlier chapter. The Results pane shows you the results of your search. You can use the Select Media box to limit your results to certain types of files. Since we're only looking for audio loops, let's change this setting from All Media Types to Audio Files. You can click on this gear icon to customize the column headings. And these triple arrow buttons reset your filters. This box shows you the total number of results. The last pane is the Previewer. After you select a result, the Previewer lets you listen to it. The Previewer also has tools to synchronize the preview and your project so you can hear the selection in context. Since we're only interested in loops, we have the option of using a specialized version of Media Bay called the Loop Browser. Loop Browser is also found under the Media menu. You can see that it looks almost identical to Media Bay. The only difference is that Loop Browser is pre-configured to look for loops, so you don't have to adjust as many filter settings. A new feature introduced in Cubase 6 is the Mini Media Bay. Let's use the Mini Media Bay in the logical filter mode to find a bass loop called Thumb Funk 1 Basic. We'll set name, matches, thumb funk. Now we can see the number of results is 9, and here's the loop we want. Let's use the previewer to listen to it. Now I'll double-click the loop to bring it into the project at the beginning of the song. Now let's repeat this process to find a suitable drum loop and a vocal loop. Now that we have a few loops loaded up, let's look at what we can do with them. I'm going to concentrate on the drums first. The first thing I want to do is reduce the project tempo. If we place the drum loop into musical mode, it will automatically slow down without changing pitch. You toggle between musical mode and linear mode by clicking here. The yellow node icon means musical mode is turned on. Now I'll click on Tempo in the transport panel and switch to Fixed. Now let's play the loop and hear what it sounds like. Okay, that sounds better. The next thing we need to do is copy this loop to lengthen our drum track. There are several ways to do this. You can select the audio event and press Command or Control and D for duplicate. This will make a copy and automatically paste it into position after the original. You can select the audio event and then open the Edit menu and select Copy. Then, select the track where you want to paste the copy, position the cursor, select Edit again, and then Paste. You can speed up the copy and paste process with the shortcut keys, Command or Control, C, and then V. You also have the option to select the audio event, hover over the right-hand corner sizing handle, and hold down the Option key on your keyboard. The pointer will change to a pencil tool. Now you can click and drag it to the right. When you let go, Cubase will put copies of the audio event into the audio part automatically. Let's build this part out to measure 25 or so. Okay, let's work on that bass part. First, I'll duplicate it enough times to match the drums. But to keep it from becoming too monotonous, let's transpose the third pattern and the fifth pattern. I'm going to hold down the Command key and click on them to select them both at once. Then, under the Audio menu, I'll select Process and Pitch Shift. I'll set this to transpose the pitch up 5 semitones, or a perfect fourth. I'm also going to change the algorithm to polycomplex. This algorithm takes the longest to compute, but it will provide a high-quality result. When you click Process, Cubase will ask your permission to create a new version of the waveform. It has to do this since your copies all refer back to the same original sample on the hard drive. Okay, let's hear how that sounds. Terrific! Let's go ahead and transpose pattern 4 up just a bit further. We'll use 7 semitones, or a perfect fifth, to add some variety. Now let's bring in that vocal loop. If I open the pool, I can see all of the audio events used in this project. Notice that one column of information gives the musical key for the event. You can see that the original bass loop was in the key of E. You can see that there are multiple copies of it because of the new versions we created. Unfortunately, there's no way for the loop to know what's been transposed, so all versions will still say key of E. Notice that the vocal loop is in the key of D. This means to get the vocal loop to work with the bass loop, the vocals will need to be pitch shifted or transposed up 2 semitones from D to E. Now, let's hear how that sounds. Cool. You can find great sounding loops for almost any style of music at the Steinberg online shop. The SQL content sets will work seamlessly with Cubase. The content sets will automatically install the VST sound folder. You can then use the Define Locations function in Media Bay to navigate these loops quickly. Let's move on to Chapter 8, where we'll explore how to use the new note expression system and several other new features found in Cubase 6. In this chapter, we'll show you the new note expression to your MIDI performance, the new Halion Sonic SE virtual instrument to get the most out of note expression, how to add articulations to your MIDI performance, useful ways to employ the Group Edit function to manage several parts more efficiently, how the new hit point system works, and the use of enhanced quantizing features with audio. Steinberg has introduced a revolution in MIDI editing with Cubase 6. It's called Note Expression, and it will radically change how we think about and work with MIDI notes. To fully understand this, let's take a closer look at how MIDI works. We already learned that basic MIDI data contains note on and note off commands so that electronic instruments can be triggered remotely. Soon the MIDI protocol was expanded to include other data besides note on and note off. All of this other data is collectively known as controller commands. But the MIDI standard sends data out along channels. This means if you're playing a 4-note chord through a string sound and wish to add modulation, you had to modulate all 4 notes. In a real ensemble, it's unlikely all 4 players would use exactly the same vibrato at the same time. You can't reach inside the chord and send controller information to just one note, because MIDI works on channels. Another limitation of the MIDI standard and its channel-based design becomes obvious when editing. Here's an example of MIDI performance with several associated lanes of controller data. The notes are shown here. But down here, we see multiple channels of controller information. This can make accurate editing very difficult because you have to edit both the note lanes and the controller lanes. Steinberg's new note expression protocol removes both of these limitations. The first thing it does is present all the controller information with the note data, visually associating the two. Let's look at the same MIDI passage and its controller data again, but using the new note expression system. Now you can select a group of notes and have instant visual access to all the controller parameters. And if you edit this group of notes, the controller information will be edited at the same time, so you can cut, copy, and paste without losing the feel of the performance. But even more remarkable is the way note expression lets you apply controller information to individual notes, not just to channels. You can reach inside a MIDI chord and apply controller data to some notes and not others. Here's how pitch bend was forced to work before note expression. But listen to how we can use note expression to pitch bend just one of these notes. Amazing! You can record note expression data in real time as an overdub or even draw it in, and the operations manual covers all of these items in a step-by-step fashion. You'll also see new tabs for note expression and for the expression map in the updated key editor. Here, you'll also have the ability to map the dynamics of your performance to the articulations in its score. If you create a new controller lane for articulations and dynamics in the key editor, you can use dynamics mapping to control what articulation symbols appear automatically in the score. Conversely, as you change articulations in the score, you'll hear changes in the dynamics of your MIDI performance. In order to apply controller information on the note level, as we've just seen, you have to use a note expression compatible instrument. Fortunately, Steinberg included such an instrument with Cubase 6. This is the Halion Sonic SE. Halion Sonic SE is a smaller version of Steinberg's flagship workstation, Halion Sonic. Halion Sonic SE is capable of interpreting note expression data right out of the box. Any sound which is compatible with note expression will have Note EXP in its name. Halion Sonic is a true workstation. You can open its editor and load up numerous sounds and play them back in combination, or use them as separate sound modules for multi-track performances. Halion Sonic SE is also loaded with numerous innovative performance controllers and devices such as the orb and trigger pads. Let's take a quick tour. And that's only scratching the surface. Another new feature in Cubase 6 is the Group Edit feature for folder tracks. This provides you a quick way to apply one edit to multiple tracks at the same time. To use the Group Edit, create a folder track. Then, place all the tracks you wish to edit inside the folder. To make this easier, you can use the new command, Select Tracks to Folder, to help set up your edit group quickly. Then, enable the Group Edit button, and any edits you will make will be applied to all the tracks in that folder. Some other enhancements include a smart grid in the main project window that automatically scales to the selected quantized value. And the Transport Nudge feature works with the new Smart Grid to move the cursor by one increment of the current quantized value. You can now export all of the data on your notepads to a text file. And the delete key will no longer delete tracks. Previously, it was very easy to accidentally delete a track by pressing the delete key too many times. The default settings in Cubase 6 requires that you use the menu item Remove Selected Track to avoid accidental deletions. Other new features include a more logical layout and naming record modes on the transport panel. And the Preferences menu now lets you configure the track arming behavior for MIDI tracks and audio tracks separately. The hit point detection in Cubase 6 has been improved as well. If you're new to Cubase, hit points are used for detecting the beat of a recording and then slicing it or warping it to change the tempo. In previous versions of Cubase, hit points were calculated for the entire waveform based on time. This system worked well, but often created too many hit points, and it aligned them with the beginning of a sound. The new system is much more musical. Detection is now based on volume, and hit points are placed at much more musical locations, such as on set instead of note transient. This is a small change that makes a big difference because Cubase now hears the beat, like you and I. To calculate hit points, open the sample editor. Open the appropriate tab in the inspector. You'll notice that the sensitivity slider has been replaced with this threshold slider. The threshold slider is used to select hit points, but it works off volume and you can see a visual guide on the editor. This makes it easier to filter out crosstalk and noise signals that have no relevance to this track. The operations manual covers how to edit, move, and delete hit points in detail. Cubase 6 also provides the option to create MIDI notes. This is a great feature if you want to use a live drum performance to trigger sample drum sounds, a technique known as drum replacement. You could also use these MIDI notes to simply augment your live drum sound with additional samples or sonic textures. Once you've added hit points to a piece of audio, you can slice it and apply quantization or automatic timing adjustments. The quantize tools in Cubase 6 are much more streamlined than previous versions. They're all consolidated on one quantize panel instead of placed on separate drop-down menus. You can drag and drop MIDI data to the panel to create a groove map. And most of the MIDI quantize functions can now be used with audio quantizing. This is because Audio Quantize now provides audio clips with start, end, and length information, just like a MIDI note. There's even a catch range which allows you to quantize some beats and not others. Let's move on to Chapter 9, where we'll see how to use tempo estimation, MIDI effects, the arranger track, and sidechaining to take your production into new directions. In this chapter, how to apply tempo estimation to sync a project to a pre-recorded piece of music quickly. How to apply audio warping when changing tempo. The use of MIDI effects to supplement your compositions. How to use the arranger track to simplify song construction. How to use sidechaining to create a variety of effects. How to use VariAudio to convert audio to MIDI data, and how to use the score function to create printed music. Historically, MIDI and other electronic tools could only be used with music that was created on a computer. It was impossible to synchronize a live performance without timecode or click track. Cubase 6 offers a solution. The new tempo estimation function allows Cubase to synchronize itself by making subtle adjustments in the tempo track. Let's start with a few bars of material recorded with no tempo reference at all. You'll notice the audio and the metronome do not line up. We have to turn on the tempo track so that Cubase can adjust its metronome throughout the song. Select the audio track and then open the Tempo Detection panel. Now click Analyze. Then click Done. Cubase will generate a rough tempo track to match the freeform audio. Let's listen to our audio and our click track and see if they line up now. Much better. You can see there are a lot of tools here to smooth and refine your tempo track, as well as making adjustments for syncopations, time signature changes, and other rhythmic devices. You can also tune your tempo track a little at a time using the iterative tuning command. You can also use tempo detection to warp a freeform performance to a fixed tempo project. To do this, complete the steps for tempo estimation, then open the audio menu and select Advanced. Now, click on the Set Definition from Tempo option. Here you can choose to apply changes to just this project or to this audio clip globally. You also have the option to place all tracks into musical mode. And click OK. Now we can set our project back to a fixed tempo and the audio will be warped to match it. Let's take just a moment to review some vocabulary. There are 3 similar terms that can be confusing to a new user. They include quantizing, audio warping, and time warping. All 3 are ways to adjust the relationship between musical events and the song's rhythm. Let's think of the song's rhythm as a ruler, and the markings on it represent bars and beats. In other words, you would tap your foot in time with these markings. To get a good rhythmic feel, the notes in the music also have to line up with the markings. We can make that happen in 3 different ways. Quantizing, which started with MIDI, means moving the notes so they align to the grid. Quantizing can now be done with audio as well as MIDI. Audio warping means stretching the performance so it aligns to the grid. Time warping means stretching the grid so it aligns to the performance. Sometimes a combination of all 3 is required to achieve the desired result. But not only does Cubase allow you to process audio as if it were MIDI, Cubase also lets you process MIDI much like it were audio. We typically think of effects as being limited to audio processing, but Cubase has a large collection of MIDI effects as well. You access MIDI effects from the MIDI Inserts tab in the Inspector of MIDI Tracks and Instrument Tracks. Here you can see a comprehensive list. Some of these features work more as tools to help transpose or convert MIDI from one key to another. Still others, like Arpège 5, are terrific in generating creative new alternatives. Simply activate them on your instrument track and then begin to explore. One of the most widely used MIDI inserts is Beat Designer. We looked at Beat Designer briefly in Chapter 4, but let's dig a little deeper. Beat Designer is a straightforward, pattern-based sequencer that works well when composing drum parts. It requires a sound generator like Groove Agent 1. Let's open up Groove Agent 1 and Beat Designer and get the 2 going together like in Chapter 4. Beat Designer gives you the ability to designate a time for each lane, designate its MIDI note assignment, adjust its swing, or even delete the lane entirely. You can adjust the volume and flam by where you click on the square or with the global flam controls in the lower left corner. You can access a large library of presets by using the preset browser. You can establish how many steps you want to work with and at what resolution. You have a jump control setting which determines how Beat Designer switches from one pattern to the next. You may want to jump immediately, or you may want it to finish the pattern before changing to the next pattern. At the bottom are banks and subbanks. They're laid out in a keyboard pattern, so you can use Beat Designer as a live part of a performance and trigger pattern changes from a keyboard. Use the Edit menu to move your patterns from Beat Designer to your MIDI track or instrument track if you'd rather work in a linear fashion. One note: after you've pasted your patterns into a track, you should turn off Beat Designer so it doesn't run along with your MIDI part when you play back your project. Beat Designer can do more than drums. If you insert it on a synth track, Beat Designer can be used as a sequencer for bass or synth parts, like this. Another powerful creative tool is the Arranger track. The Arranger track lets you work with sections of your project in a nonlinear fashion. This way, you don't have to copy and paste events in the project window. Let's create an Arranger track from the Project Add Track menu. Now we'll designate portions of our drums, bass, and synth lines as Arranger events. To do this, activate the snap and use the pencil tool to draw out an appropriate section on the Arranger track. Now, let's give this section an appropriate name. Repeat this process for several other portions of our project. Now we need to construct an Arranger chain to build up our song. Open the editor on the Arranger track. You can add Arranger events to the Arranger chain in several ways. You can double-click an event on the left side of the editor. Right-click and select an action. Drag and drop events from the editor list. And drag and drop events directly from the project window. There's an option to designate how many times a specific section should repeat. This avoids having to chain together multiple instances of shorter material. The last step is to click on the Activate icon to make the Arranger track work. Depending on what style of music you're making, this may be just what you need. It's also a handy way to try out different sequences of verse and chorus during the initial songwriting phase. And of course, it works the same with MIDI tracks and audio tracks. Another production trick is known as sidechaining. A sidechain is a type of connection between two audio devices, typically an audio source and compressor. Sidechaining was born out of necessity in the early days of broadcasting, but has become a popular element in modern dance music. The original purpose of sidechaining a compressor was to automatically turn down the music when the announcer was speaking. That particular trick is still used and is called ducking. But we can use the same concept to generate a pumping dance bass. To make this work, we'll need two things. First, we need a strong bass tone with a compressor across it. Second, we need a rhythmic source to trigger the compressor. Let's create a bass part. Now we'll insert a compressor and activate sidechain mode. Activating sidechain will automatically create another routing option in our VST connections, which we'll see in a moment. We want to trigger the compressor with the kick drum so that our bass sound will pump in time with the kick. To do this, we'll use Duplicate Track on the drums, and then delete everything but the kick. We don't want to route this kick drum to the mix. We want to route it to the compressor, like this. Now, when we start playback, the compressor will only activate when the kick drum is playing. Let's start playback to create a simple bass tone. Nothing too dramatic so far. Now let's adjust the compressor to a much more radical setting so we can really hear it closing down. That's more like it. Remember that most compressors are designed so that you don't hear them. To get this effect, we have to undo all of that programming. So a few things to keep in mind. You'll probably want to turn off the automatic mode and avoid using the soft knee, analysis, and hold settings. You'll want to use a high ratio with a very low attack and release times. The lower you set these values, the crisper the effect will become. The threshold control will affect syncopation, and the makeup gain will work like a master volume control for the effect. This effect isn't to everyone's liking, of course, but it's popular in some genres, and Cubase can certainly deliver. Let's move back to our original project and explore one of the more conservative features of Cubase, scoring. Cubase is so well known as a DAW and sequencer that many owners don't realize it's also one of the most powerful music scoring packages on the market. Let's look at one area where the functions of recording and scoring come together. Let's create a lead sheet for our first project, Gonna Getcha. Instead of starting with a blank slate and drawing notes by hand, we'll take a shortcut by converting Janelle's vocals to MIDI notes, which will create the score. To keep things clean, we'll use duplicate track to copy the lead vocal line. This way we can make edits required for the score without disturbing our original part. Now we'll activate Very Audio and let Cubase analyze Janelle's vocals. From here, we'll select Convert to MIDI and place those MIDI notes in a new track. Now we open the score menu and open the part. The new note expression system means that score will capture Janelle's articulation and modulation as well as her notes. With a little bit of editing and a little bit of typing, you can generate a professional lead sheet in no time. Let's move on to Chapter 10, where we'll look at live drums and how to prepare a final mix for maximizing and dither. In this chapter, we're going to work with some multi-channel live drums and apply what we've learned about hit points, folder tracks, group edit and quantize, as well as slice rules. Then we'll import these drums into our project and work with mixing, mastering, and dither. Here's a project that contains a very basic multi-track drum recording. Each drum was recorded into its own track through a separate microphone. Before we can adapt this performance to other projects, we need to slice it so it can be quantized. Open the sample editor for the kick drum by double-clicking the waveform. Select the Hit Points tab and move the threshold slider to remove the lower volume sounds from the other drums. These lower volume sounds are also known as crosstalk or spill. Close the sample editor, but do not click Slice. We'll do that in a moment. Now repeat this process for the snare top and hi-hat. We may need to disable a few hit points around measure 9 and 10 to accommodate the fill. We won't use the threshold control for setting hi-hat hit points because of all the conflicting signal levels. Rather, let's set these hit points by using the beat setting and a resolution of 1/8. Now that we have hit points for each of the three main percussive instruments in this drum part, it's time to slice. Open the Quantize panel. Enable the Edit Group function on the drums folder track so that our slicing will affect all the drums. Select any drum part. Let's use the kick drum. Notice that a new part of the Quantize panel appears called Slice Rules. This pane only appears if there's more than one track with different hit points. Here we can tell Cubase how to prioritize the slicing in case any two hit points conflict with one another. Let's set the kick drum to 5 stars, the snare drum to 4 stars, and the hi-hat to 3 stars. There's also a range setting. Its value is shown in red on the editor to help you visually determine if the range value is correct. Click Slice. All of the tracks in our group folder are sliced at identical positions. They can now be quantized, but keep their relationship to one another so we avoid any phase issues. Now we will try something different. We will use the original unquantized drum tracks in our song. To do that, let's import the drum files into our project. And after some careful positioning to make sure the downbeat of the new drum aligns with the downbeat of our MIDI drums, we have an entirely new drum part and an entirely new feel.
Don't hide, my friend.
After the storm, there's our double rainbow. Can't wait to see you again.
Of course, you can keep any of the MIDI drum elements you like and build a hybrid rhythm section. What started back in Chapter 3 as a simple guitar and voice performance has become a fully produced song. Now it's time for a proper mixdown. The subject of mixing music could fill an entire library, so we'll just touch on a few of the basics here to get you started. One golden rule when using EQ is to cut rather than boost whenever possible. Often, a mix becomes muddy because of too many similar frequencies fighting with one another. For example, there's no musical content in the human voice below about 100 Hz. So the only thing you'll have recorded in a vocal track below 100 is going to be noise, often things like motors or traffic. To get rid of that clutter, we can roll off the low end of Janelle and Andrew's vocal tracks. You can apply the same general rule to other tracks, for instance, rolling off the high end of bass drum parts. This will remove unwanted hiss without affecting the sound of the instrument. Most instruments have a signature frequency. To ensure you retain the instrument's quality and clarity, use care when cutting and boosting. The Steinberg Knowledge Base and the Cubase Users Forum are great sources of information about mixing technique. Remember that Cubase comes loaded with a comprehensive library of track presets, which you can load and then fine-tune to taste. These track presets will give you a good idea of how to configure compressors, EQ, and effects for different types of tracks. Finally, we'll apply some subtle panning to widen the stereo image. Now it's time to master this project. Just like mixing, mastering could fill a library, but here are a few pointers to get you started. Open the editor for the master output bus. You'll notice there are no send effects available, only inserts. The last two insert effect slots are shown in a different color. Slots 7 and 8 are special because they're post-fader. This means they're the very last two steps in the entire signal chain and are not affected by the master fader. If there are two absolute rules with mastering, they are never clip, always dither. Dithering is a digital optimization on the data level that essentially smooths the rough edges of the digital recording process. Proper dithering is essential for a fully professional result, and dithering must be the last step in the process to work correctly. With that in mind, let's load up slot 8 with the UV22 mastering plugin. Set the bit depth according to your needs. Generally speaking, greater bit depth equals better sound quality but a larger file size. Let's use slot 7 for the Maximizer plugin. The Maximizer is a specialized form of compressor that will increase the perceived volume of your project, known as optimizing. Generally speaking, optimized settings below about 30% will provide a nice boost without becoming noticeable or even obnoxious. The most important thing the Maximizer will do is prevent your output from ever going above digital 0 and clipping. The Maximizer has a soft clip function that emulates the subtle compression found in analog tape saturation. For most types of music, the soft clip feature works very well and delivers flattering results. You'll have to experiment with the setting to find the best fit for your style of music. Now we're ready to export. This time, let's use a WAV format for the highest sound quality. And let's place a copy of our final mix onto our project for future reference. Perfect! This one's in the can. Let's move to Chapter 11, where we'll look at the control room, studio mixes, surround sound, and ways to use Cubase 6 in a live environment. In this chapter, we're going to see how to use some important workflow tools and live applications. Specifically, we'll look at how to open and configure the control room to set up separate monitors and separate headphone mixes, how to set up and use the talkback and listen features of the control room, how to configure buses, tracks, mixes, and plugins to accommodate 5.1 surround sound, and how to use Cubase 6 in a live setting. Cubase can be configured for use in a traditional multi-room studio. In this type of facility, you typically have performers isolated in their own performance spaces, and the engineer or producer in another location called a control room. Cubase 6 allows you to set up your facility this way using the control room. The control room allows for a main mix to the engineer and 4 separate headphone mixes for the performers. These performers could be in separate locations or in one room, but with a different mix in each set of headphones. The control room also allows other important operations like switching monitors, talkback capacity, switching between mono, stereo, and surround modes, and selective dimming, known as listening, to help with troubleshooting during mixing. How many of these features you can use in your studio will depend on the processing power of your CPU and the routing options on your audio interface. Let's begin by enabling the control room in the VST Connections menu and the Studio tab. Next, we need to configure our connections, which are also called buses. There are 5 types of connections to choose from. The external input buses are for playback devices, like a CD player. Talkback is for a microphone at the mixing board, which the engineer uses to speak to the various performers throughout the studio. Talkback will be vital if your performers will be in separate rooms. Studios are the individual headphone mixes for your performers. Phones allow you to set up a dedicated headphone mix for the engineer, just in case your audio interface doesn't have a dedicated headphone jack on it. And monitors allow you to connect separate speakers to your interface and switch between them from within Cubase. Here's what a typical control room configuration looks like. The operations manual explains the details of setting up each type of bus step by step. One note, it's important to turn off the normal outputs in the Outputs tab so they don't conflict with the control room output routing. Now it's time to open the control room mixer. The control room mixer allows us to turn the talkback mic on and off, select which studios will hear the talkback signal, change monitors, change stereo configuration, select which mix is played in the control room, select which mix is played in each performer's studio, select who can hear the click track, and activate the listen function and determine how much to turn down the rest of the mix when a track is in listen mode. To activate the performer studios, select all tracks, then right-click on the control room mixer. Select Enable. You adjust the individual performer's mix or headphone mix in the main project mixer. Click on the star icon to call up the studio and send view. Make sure all the tracks have their studio sends turned on. Right-click on the control room mixer to set all studios to the current mix and pan levels. Now you can click and drag to make small adjustments for each track in each studio. Let's take a quick moment to look at how Cubase 6 handles surround sound. You record and play back surround, or 5.1, material in basically the same way as a normal stereo track. The only real difference is that you need more inputs and outputs on your interface, and you need to configure your buses for 5.1. Let's create a new bus in VST Connections. This time for configuration, select 5.1. Now let's add a new audio track and we'll configure it for 5.1 as well. Now when you record, you'll get recordings packaged as one 5.1 surround track. Of course, your interface must be configured to play back 5.1 signals, and you'll need an appropriate 5.1 surround amplifier and speaker setup to really take advantage of this capability. Here's an example of how a 5.1 surround plugin works. This is the surround panner, as well as a 5.1 mix and export. Finally, let's take a quick look at ways to use Cubase in a live environment. The first question you need to ask yourself is, where will I be during the show? On stage or at the front of house? If your desire is to use Cubase to capture a live performance, the fundamental recording process is no different from previously discussed. However, there are a few additional considerations. Do you have an audio interface that can receive enough channels to simultaneously multitrack? Or do you need to set up for a stereo-only mix? Will you place your own mics on the performer? Or will you take an aux send from the main mixing board? How clean is that signal? Does your laptop have enough CPU power to record a large number of tracks at once? Consider placing a protection limiter across the input bus on each channel to prevent transients or feedback from overloading your system. Put in the time ahead of time to configure templates and presets for the show, so you don't have to hold up the show or miss material while you're frantically adding tracks or routing signals. Preparation is everything. The band rehearses their part, you need to rehearse your part. If you're going to use Cubase on stage, you have several options. If you're a keyboard player, Cubase can serve as a powerful VST instrument rack. You can create a separate VST instrument rack inside Cubase for every song. You can, of course, use Cubase as a drum machine or a sequencer to supply rhythm or backing parts, just like traditional hardware sequencers. If you're a guitarist, You can use Cubase as a powerful effects rack using the VST amp rack and a low buffer setting. You can also save different VST amp rack configurations as different songs or different track presets to make switching between them a snap. If you're a DJ, then it's time to take a fresh look at Loop Mash 2. Loop Mash was introduced in version 5, and it provided many interesting possibilities. But the new performance controls in version 6 take it to a whole new level. Loop Mash 2 gives you 24 scenes, individual slice playback, edit, and effects, more global effects, the ability to drag and drop slices to form composite loops, the ability to drag and drop slices to Groove Agent 1, but best of all, 20 new performance controllers pre-configured to trigger from your master keyboard. Here's a sample. Finally, let's move into our last chapter where we'll demonstrate how to set up and use remote controls, quick controls, and user panels. In this chapter, we're going to demonstrate the use of internal and external control devices to help make your interaction with Cubase as intuitive and creative as possible. We'll take a look at how to use automation, how to set up and use quick controls to keep your favorite functions at your fingertips, how to configure device panels to streamline VST instrument and effect editing, how to configure a generic remote control, and how to configure the Steinberg CC121 control surface. One of the greatest advantages to making music with a computer-based system is the ability to recall and automate almost anything. Anywhere you see these W and R icons, you can use automation. In simplest terms, if you click the red W, Cubase will then write automation data. The system will remember every move you make. To stop writing automation, click the W again. Engaging the write command automatically brings on the read function. Here's an example of using automation to delay only the last beat of a phrase. We'll do this by automating the bypass function on the effect. Cubase provides a centralized automation panel to help keep track of what you've automated. Each track has a hidden button here in the left-hand corner. Clicking this down caret will expand the automation lanes for that track. If you engage Write Automation, you may manually edit the automation events by adding points, moving points, or deleting points. New in Cubase 6 is the ability to scale automation data, also known as applying trim, using a graphic interface much like we have to scale audio events. Also new in version 6 is the ability to right-click on a plugin and reveal automation, giving you an instant look at what's been automated with that device. Another way to increase your control and speed up your workflow is by using quick controls. Each track has 8 quick control slots. These quick controls can be assigned to almost any parameter within Cubase. For example, if you want to adjust the amount of reverb on a track without constantly opening several editors, map it to a quick control, like this. Now I can adjust the amount of reverb right from the inspector. Once set up, quick controls let you reach inside Cubase right from the project window. There are several new refinements to quick controls in version 6. These include the ability of a quick control to learn what parameter it's assigned to rather than picking from a list. To do this, select a quick control slot, click Learn. Then either move a hardware control or click and move a software control, such as a plug-in parameter. Learn will automatically disable after the new assignment is learned. An excellent application of this would be to use Learn to assign several quick controls to a foot pedal on a hardware controller. Then map those quick control slots to the stomp boxes in the VST amp rack. You can also right-click on devices inside Cubase and map them to a quick control slot right from the editor, like this. There's a new button for Quick Clear to get you back to a blank slate in one step. And you can reload default settings from a plugin just as quickly with the arrow icon. Another tab you'll see in the inspector is the Panels tab. Here, you can configure custom graphic interfaces to either streamline the use of plugins, almost like an elaborate quick control, or to program your external hardware devices from inside Cubase, including the ability to automate those parameters. Here's an example of a user panel for a popular hardware synthesizer. The process to create and assign all of the desired parameters is clearly spelled out in the operations manual. Once configured, user panels help you control even vintage MIDI synths and MIDI rack gear right from Cubase. You can also configure Cubase to respond to a variety of control surfaces. If you have a control surface, or any controller that sends out MIDI data from faders and buttons, you can configure a generic remote. The process is very straightforward. Select Generic Remote. Select the parameter you wish to control. Engage the MIDI Learn function much like we did in Quick Controls, and then move the hardware control you wish to assign. Now you can use that hardware fader to control that Cubase parameter. At the other end of the spectrum is the purpose-built Steinberg CC121 controller. Cubase comes pre-configured to use this dedicated hardware device. Simply open the Device Setup menu and you'll see CC121. The hardware buttons on the CC121 mirror those on a typical Cubase track, as well as hardware knobs for EQ, full transport buttons, and a jog wheel. There are also 4 soft controllers which you can assign. Finally, if you're using a Macintosh computer, then Cubase can be configured to respond to your Apple remote. Here's a look at the wide variety of choices for your configuration. As long as you have line of sight with your Mac, this is a great way to remotely control Cubase. But you may want to write down the configuration until you've used it enough to remember all the button assignments. We hope you've enjoyed and learned from these tutorials. We've only scratched the surface of what you and Cubase can do. Be sure to check out the Steinberg Knowledge Base, Cubase online community, forums, and the operations manual to find out even more about Cubase. For everyone here at Steinberg, thanks for choosing Cubase, and thanks for watching.